There are households that function by a set of rules no one ever writes down. The rules exist anyway, enforced not through argument or confrontation, but through the quiet repetition of daily life. Someone cooks, someone pays, someone adjusts their behavior without being asked, someone else notices and says nothing. Over years, this arrangement becomes so familiar that no one questions it anymore. It simply becomes the shape of the home. And when a home runs on invisible rules for long enough, the people inside it begin to believe those rules are permanent until the day one person decides they are not. The night Evelyn Marsh watched her son leave for the most important dinner of his career, she was wearing the same pearl earrings she had worn to his college graduation 17 years earlier. She had pressed her dress that afternoon, polished her shoes, and spent 20 minutes arranging her hair in the mirror above the hallway console table. She looked appropriate. She looked composed. She looked exactly like the kind of mother a successful man would be proud to introduce to his colleagues. So when Marcus turned from the front door, looked at her carefully, and told her she would not be attending the dinner after all, Evelyn did not cry. She did not argue. She simply looked at him for a long moment and asked him to repeat what he had just said, because she wanted to be completely certain she had heard it correctly. He repeated it, and then he explained it. Marcus Aldwell was 41 years old and had spent the last 6 years building himself into exactly the kind of man he had always intended to become. See, his name appeared on the letterhead of a regional investment firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, in raised font just beneath the managing directors. He owned a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood where the lawns were maintained by professional landscaping crews and the driveways held German automobiles. He wore his success with the practiced ease of someone who had studied how successful men behaved before becoming one himself. And most of the time, that performance was flawless. His mother, Evelyn, had lived with him for 3 years by the time of that evening. She had moved in after selling the small house in Greensboro where Marcus had grown up, telling him and herself that it made more practical sense. The Greensboro house had a leaking roof that would cost more to fix than the property was worth. And Evelyn had recently retired from her position as a registered nurse after 31 years at the same hospital. She was 64 years old, quietly capable, and deeply uninterested in being a burden to anyone. So she had agreed to Marcus's invitation, packed her things with methodical efficiency, and settled into the guest room on the second floor of his Charlotte house, as though she had always known she would end up there. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked. Evelyn maintained the household in ways that Marcus never fully acknowledged but relied on entirely. She managed the grocery orders, monitored the utility bills, kept track of which contractors were due for which maintenance visits, and prepared meals 4 nights a week with the kind of quiet competence that made everything around her run without friction. In return, Marcus had offered her a room, her living expenses, and the occasional dinner out at a restaurant he chose. He had not offered her gratitude, at least not in the way she would have recognized it, and she had not asked for it because she understood the unspoken terms of the arrangement even when he did not say them aloud. What she had not understood, not until that evening, was that the terms had changed without her knowledge. The dinner Marcus was attending was a client appreciation event hosted by his firm at the Alderton Club, a private dining establishment in uptown Charlotte that required a membership to enter and a certain kind of personal history to feel comfortable inside. The managing director had told the senior team to bring family if they wished. Several of Marcus's colleagues had confirmed their spouses were attending. One had mentioned his parents were flying in from Atlanta. The event was precisely the kind of occasion where background details became visible, where the people standing beside you communicated something about who you were and where you had come from. That context was what Marcus had been thinking about for the 3 days before the dinner. Evelyn learned this not from him directly, but from the fragments she assembled afterward. He had been distracted at breakfast on 2 consecutive mornings, barely responsive when she asked him questions about the week's schedule. He had closed his home office door more often than usual, and on the evening before the dinner he had stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment while she was washing dishes, said nothing, and then walked away without explanation. She had noticed all of it, and she had said nothing because she was practiced in the art of giving people space to arrive at their own conclusions. He arrived at his conclusion in the front hallway at 6:17 on a Tuesday evening. Evelyn had been standing near the mirrored console table, checking that her earrings were even when Marcus came downstairs. He was wearing a charcoal suit she had taken to the dry cleaner the previous week, a pale blue shirt, and a silk tie she had given him as a birthday gift 3 years earlier. He looked polished. He looked prepared. And he was looking at her in a way that told her he had already decided what he was about to say before he stepped off the last stair. He told her that he thought it would be better if she did not come to the dinner. He told her the event was more formal than he had initially described. He said there would be important clients present and several managing partners from the firm's parent company, and that the evening carried significant professional weight. He spoke clearly, without meanness, and with the particular careful tone of someone who had rehearsed the explanation enough times to deliver it without any visible emotion. Then he said it. He told her that introducing her to people in that room would be complicated, that her background, he used that exact word, background, was not the kind of thing that translated well in that environment, that the other family members attending had professional histories, graduate degrees, established names in business and finance. He was not trying to be unkind, he said. He was trying to be realistic about the impressions certain things created. Evelyn stood very still while he spoke. She kept her eyes on him and her hands relaxed at her sides, and she did not interrupt him once. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she told him she completely understood. She smiled. She told him to enjoy the evening. And when he leaned in to kiss her cheek and thank her for being reasonable about it, she did not pull away, because she was not ready yet to let him know what she had already decided. After Marcus left, the house settled into the kind of quiet that only exists when someone who has been filling a space is suddenly gone. Evelyn stood in the front hallway for a moment, then walked slowly into the kitchen. She filled a glass of water from the tap and stood at the sink, also looking out at the backyard where the landscaping crew had shaped the hedges into perfect geometric forms that always looked slightly too controlled to her. She drank the water slowly, set the glass on the counter, and then walked to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen where she kept a yellow legal pad for lists. She sat down and started writing, not quickly, not frantically, but with the focused deliberateness of someone organizing a complicated task they had been mentally preparing for without fully realizing it. The list began with her documents: birth certificate, nursing license, social security card, the folder containing her personal financial records. These were kept in the lockbox in the back of her bedroom closet, and she knew exactly where the key was because she had placed it there herself the week she moved in. Yet next came the things she had brought with her from Greensboro that Marcus had absorbed into the house without ever asking. The set of copper-bottom pots hanging above the kitchen island, those were hers, inherited from her mother. The oil painting in the dining room that she had carried wrapped in a moving blanket, that was hers too, purchased at an estate sale in 1998 for $40 and worth considerably more now, according to an appraiser she had spoken with casually at a gallery opening 2 years earlier. The handmade quilt folded over the back of the chair in the sitting room, the standing lamp in the hallway, the set of reference books on the built-in shelves in the study that Marcus never opened but which she had annotated over 30 years of professional practice. The list was longer than she expected. By the time she finished writing it, nearly 40 minutes had passed. She went upstairs and changed out of her pressed dress and pearl earrings. She put on comfortable clothes, pulled her hair back, and then she began. She started in the kitchen because that was where the most physical work was. The copper pots came down from the rack one at a time, each wrapped carefully in the kitchen towels she had also brought from Greensboro. She arranged them in the large cardboard box she retrieved from the storage space beneath the stairs where Marcus kept his seasonal items. She worked without rushing, placing each item with deliberate attention so nothing would be damaged in transit. The kitchen felt different with the pots gone. The rack above the island, now empty, made the ceiling feel higher, and the room looked like a staged version of itself, presentable but hollow. She moved through the dining room next. The oil painting came off the wall with two hands and was wrapped in the same moving blanket she had used to transport it 3 years earlier, which she had kept folded in the back of her bedroom closet because she had always believed in keeping the means of a departure accessible, even when no departure was planned. She set it carefully against the wall in the front hallway beside the growing collection of boxes. In the sitting room, she folded the quilt into a neat rectangle, placed it inside a duffel bag, and stood for a moment looking at the chair it had rested on. The chair was Marcus's. The space it occupied was Marcus's. The room, in fact, was almost entirely Marcus's, furnished with pieces selected by a decorator he had hired 18 months earlier when he decided the house needed a more cohesive visual identity. Evelyn had watched the decorator arrive, had been politely consulted about her preferences, and had understood immediately that her preferences were not the actual subject of the conversation. The decorator had nodded at everything she said and then done exactly what Marcus wanted anyway. She did not take the chair. She took only what was hers. By 9 o'clock, she had moved through the study, retrieving her annotated reference books from the shelves and stacking them in two boxes. She removed the standing lamp from the hallway. She took the framed photographs from her bedroom, the ones showing her parents, her younger sister, herself at various ages before Marcus was born and during his childhood. She left on the walls the prints and canvases that Marcus had chosen because those had never been hers to begin with. At 9:15, she called her colleague Renata, who had worked alongside her in the cardiology unit for 11 years before Evelyn retired. Renata was 60 years old, direct in the particular way that long-term nurses tend to be, and she did not ask many questions when Evelyn explained what she needed. She said she would be there in 20 minutes, and she arrived in 18, pulling her SUV into the driveway and getting out without ceremony because she had known Evelyn long enough to understand that ceremony was not what was needed. Together, they loaded the boxes and bags into Renata's vehicle. The process took 3 trips from the front hallway to the curb. Neither woman said much. Renata asked once if Evelyn was certain, and Evelyn said she was, and that was the end of the discussion. When the last box was loaded, Evelyn went back inside one final time. She walked through the house slowly. Not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to see it clearly. She wanted to take an accurate inventory of what she was leaving and what leaving it meant. The kitchen looked professionally staged without the copper pots. The dining room wall bore the clean rectangular shadow of where the painting had hung. The sitting room felt assembled from a catalog. The hallway was wider without the standing lamp. The study shelves held the remaining books, Marcus's business titles, his finance texts, several design volumes the decorator had placed there for visual effect, and they looked organized but impersonal, the kind of books that signal a category of taste without revealing anything about the person who owns them. She stood in the front hallway one last time. The console table with the mirror above it was still there. She looked at her reflection briefly. Then she walked to the kitchen, found the notepad she kept near the telephone, and wrote a single sentence on a clean sheet of paper. She placed it on the kitchen counter where Marcus would see it the moment he walked in. Then she turned off the lights, locked the front door with her key, placed the key on top of the note, and walked out. Renata had a spare room in her house in the Dilworth neighborhood, 15 minutes from Marcus's street. It was a small room with a good window and a reading chair that Evelyn had always admired on her previous visits. Renata showed her to it without comment, brought her a glass of water and a set of folded towels, told her breakfast would be available at whatever time she chose, and then left her alone. Evelyn sat in the reading chair for a long time, not reading, not crying, just sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has completed a significant task and is waiting for the adrenaline to fully dissipate. She was asleep by 10:30. Marcus arrived home from the Alderton Club dinner at 11:46. He had consumed 2 glasses of wine over the course of the evening, exchanged careful pleasantries with 3 senior partners, and spent 20 minutes in conversation with a client whose portfolio he had been managing for 4 years. The evening had gone well by most measures. The managing director had introduced him to several new contacts. He had been included in a smaller conversation after dinner about a potential expansion into private equity products that was not yet public knowledge. He had driven home feeling the particular satisfaction of a man who believes the careful maintenance of appearances has produced the result he intended. He turned the key in the front door, stepped into the hallway, and reached for the light switch. The hallway came into view. He stood there for a moment. The standing lamp was gone. He registered this without fully processing it the way a person registers a word they do not immediately recognize. He walked forward into the kitchen, turning on the overhead light. He saw the note and the key on the counter immediately. He picked up the note and read it. He read it again. Then he walked back into the hallway and looked at the rack where the copper pots had hung. Then into the dining room, where the wall held only a rectangular shadow. Then back into the kitchen, where the counter looked wide and bare in a way it never had before. He stood in the kitchen for a long time. The note was a single sentence. It said, "I have taken what was mine. The rest was always yours." He called her the following morning at 8:15. Evelyn was at Renata's kitchen table with coffee and a medical journal she had borrowed from Renata's shelf, and she let his call go to voicemail. She listened to the message after finishing her coffee. In the message, Marcus said he had come home to find things were different and that he would like to speak with her about what had happened, and that he hoped she was all right, and that he thought perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. She called him back an hour later. The conversation was brief. Marcus said he did not understand why she had left. She told him she had left because he had made it clear she was a source of embarrassment to him in his professional life, and she had decided not to continue occupying a space in his home where that was the operating understanding. He said he had not meant it that way. She told him she had heard exactly what he said, and she had taken him seriously because she had always believed in taking people seriously when they told her who they were. He asked where she was staying. She told him she was with a colleague and that she was comfortable and did not need anything from him. He asked if she planned to come back. She told him she was not planning to make any decisions quickly and that she would let him know when she had decided what came next. He asked about her things, and she told him that the things which mattered to her were already with her, and that everything remaining in the house belonged to him and had always belonged to him. There was a long pause on the line. Then Marcus asked what she had done with the painting from the dining room. She told him she had taken it because it was hers. He said nothing for a moment. Shan then said he had thought it was part of the house. She told him calmly that it had been part of her life long before the house existed, which was a distinction she had assumed was clear and apparently was not. The conversation ended without resolution, but also without raised voices, because Evelyn had no interest in conflict, and Marcus was still trying to determine the actual dimensions of what had happened. Over the following 2 weeks, Evelyn made several calls. The first was to a former colleague who had transitioned from nursing into healthcare consulting after her own retirement, and who had occasionally suggested that Evelyn's administrative skills and clinical knowledge were the kind of combination organizations paid well for. The colleague, whose name was Dr. Patricia Hughes, was not surprised to hear from her. She asked a series of practical questions and told Evelyn to send her a resume. Evelyn sent it within the hour. The second call was to a financial advisor she had consulted briefly 3 years earlier before moving in with Marcus. Her retirement savings from the hospital system, along with the proceeds from the Greensboro house sale, had remained in conservatively managed accounts during the 3 years she had lived with Marcus because she had never needed to touch them. They had grown quietly and without fanfare during that time, the way money tends to grow when it is simply left alone by someone who does not feel entitled to spend it carelessly. The numbers the advisor presented to her during their call were not dramatic, but they were sufficient. More than sufficient, actually, for what she had in mind. The third call was to a real estate agent in Charlotte who specialized in a neighborhood north of the city called Cornelius, where Evelyn had driven twice in the previous year to visit a garden center she liked and had noticed both times that the housing was good quality and the streets were quiet and there was a library within walking distance. She made an offer on a small 2-bedroom house within 10 days. It was accepted within 48 hours. 3 weeks after the evening at the Alderton Club, Marcus arrived at Renata's house on a Saturday morning. Renata answered the door, assessed him briefly, and brought him through to the back sunroom where Evelyn was reading. She set a second cup of coffee on the table beside his chair and left the room without being asked. Marcus sat down, and he looked different from the last time Evelyn had seen him in person, which had been in the front hallway of his house on the evening he told her not to come to his dinner. He looked as though he had been sleeping less than he should and thinking more than was comfortable. He told her he owed her an apology. He told her that the words he had used in the hallway that evening had been wrong, and that the way he had framed his explanation had been thoughtless and cruel. He said he had been under significant pressure at work and had made a calculation that he now understood had been deeply unkind, and that he was sorry. He said this clearly and without deflection. Evelyn listened to all of it. Then she told him she accepted his apology. He looked relieved, and then she continued speaking because she had more to say. She told him that she had spent 3 years managing his household in ways he had never acknowledged, not because she needed acknowledgement, but because she had believed she was contributing to a shared life. She said she understood now that what she had been contributing to was the maintenance of a particular image that he was constructing for himself, and that she had been, in his calculation, a feature of that image when it suited him and a liability when it did not. She said she was not angry about this. She said she was simply clear about it now in a way she had not been before. Marcus started to respond. She raised her hand gently, not imperiously, just to indicate she was not finished. He stopped. She told him about the house in Cornelius. She told him about the job consultation with Dr. Hughes, which had already produced a contract offer for part-time advisory work with a regional hospital network at a rate that surprised even her. She told him she would be moving into the new house in 3 weeks, and that she hoped they would find a way to maintain a relationship as adults who understood each other clearly. He asked about the painting. She told him it was already with an appraiser she trusted, because she had decided it was time to understand its actual value. He asked if she planned to sell it. She said she had not decided yet, but that she was enjoying learning what it was worth. There was a long pause. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. Then he looked at her and said something she had not expected. He said that when he came home the night of the dinner and found the house the way she had left it, was he had stood in the kitchen for a long time and he had felt afraid. She asked him what he had been afraid of. He said he did not know exactly, but that standing in the kitchen without the copper pots and without the painting and without any of the things that had made the house feel like more than just a well-designed space, he had understood something that he had not understood before. He said the house had felt like a set. Evelyn looked at him steadily. She told him that was because it had been. The house in Cornelius closed 31 days after her offer was accepted. Evelyn moved in on a Thursday. Renata helped her carry boxes, and 2 of Renata's adult children helped move the furniture she had ordered. Practical things, not expensive, but chosen entirely according to her own preferences without any consultation with a decorator or regard for what kind of impression they would create for visitors she had not yet met. She hung the oil painting in the living room, above a small wooden console table that was the only piece of furniture she had brought from her life before nursing, before Marcus, before all of it. It had belonged to her grandmother, and it was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but it was solid and worn in a way that felt like company. The appraiser's assessment of the painting had been delivered 2 days before the move. The number in the letter was larger than the $40 she had paid for it at that estate sale in 1998 by a significant margin. She had read the letter twice, folded it into the lockbox with her other documents, and said nothing about it to anyone except Renata, who had responded with a long silence and then said quietly that sometimes patience was the most profitable strategy a person could employ. Evelyn agreed that this was probably true. The part-time consulting contract with the hospital network began 6 weeks after the move. It involved 2 days per week of advisory work, reviewing clinical protocols and patient flow systems at 2 facilities in the region, work that required exactly the combination of administrative experience and frontline knowledge she had accumulated over 3 decades. The hourly rate was more than she had earned at any point in her nursing career. She did not find this surprising. She found it clarifying. She called Marcus on a Sunday morning 6 weeks after the move. They spoke for 20 minutes. Carefully but without hostility. He had continued to call occasionally, and she had continued to answer when she had time and energy and nothing more important to attend to, which was not always. He asked about the new house. She described it briefly and accurately. He asked about the consulting work. She told him it was going well and left it at that. He asked whether she thought things between them might eventually return to how they had been. She considered the question for a moment because it deserved a real answer rather than a polite one. Then she told him honestly that she did not think so, and that she was not certain that was the right thing to hope for. She told him that what she hoped for instead was something more accurate than what they had before, a relationship built on a clear understanding of who each of them actually was, rather than what each of them was willing to pretend. She said she would rather speak to him honestly once a month than perform a comfortable fiction every day. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. She was not completely certain he did yet, but she believed he was beginning to. The painting was eventually valued publicly when she decided, on the advice of the appraiser, to allow a regional auction house to include it in a spring sale. It attracted attention before the auction from 2 private collectors and 1 small museum acquiring works for a permanent collection. The final sale price was announced on a Tuesday afternoon in March, nearly 5 months after the evening Marcus had left for the Alderton Club in his charcoal suit. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table in the Cornelius house when she received the call. She was having tea and reading, which was how she spent most Tuesday afternoons, and the call was brief and factual, and she thanked the auction house representative and ended the conversation, and then sat quietly for a moment, looking at the wall where the painting had hung until the day before the auction. The wall was empty now, but not in the way his house had felt empty when she left it. This was a different kind of emptiness, expectant rather than hollow, a space waiting for something she had not yet chosen rather than a space that had been stripped of something it had not known it needed. She finished her tea. She placed the cup in the sink. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden, which she had been slowly organizing over the past several weeks into something that reflected her actual preferences rather than anyone else's idea of presentation. It was imperfect and in places asymmetrical, and it was entirely hers. There was no dramatic moment when she understood what she had done and what it had cost her and what it had returned to her. Understanding had arrived quietly over time, the way it usually does for people who have been paying careful attention for many years. What she knew now, standing in the kitchen of a house that belonged to her without condition or compromise, was simply this. The most expensive thing she had owned for 30 years had never been the painting. It had been her willingness to make herself smaller in rooms that did not belong to her. And she had stopped paying that price on a Tuesday evening in the front hallway of her son's house, in pearl earrings and a pressed dress, the moment she heard what he actually thought of her, and decided quietly to take him at his word.